For children and young people, social media represents a whole world of information, connection and entertainment. But with any adventure, there are risks and dangers. Research has shown that many children and young people don't have the skills they need to navigate online environments safely and critically. This leaves them vulnerable to being targeted by malicious users who use disinformation to shape their worldviews and behaviour. Children don't yet have the cognitive tools to tell the difference between factual and false information, or to identify content that is designed to spread fear and hate. They're still forming their own sense of identity and are easily influenced by what they see online in an environment full of pressure, expectations and disinformation. Online spaces can also promote hate, polarisation and extremist content, which have an impact on children and young people's view of the world, making them feel isolated, angry or afraid of people who are different from themselves. There are key skills that can help children and young people question what they see online, think critically and reject harmful narratives that try to promote hate and disrupt our democracy. The Digital Discourse Initiative, developed by experts in anti-prejudice education and counter-extremism strategies, provides teachers and educators with the tools to counter the effects of online hate and disinformation on children and young people. Curiosity is a given, but safety is not. Let's change that.
That potent smell of progressivism. Surprise, surprise. Scottish education, yet again, being targeted by bad actors who present themselves as experts, determined to ensure that misinformation and hate cannot spread amongst our youth. How commendable. How very progressive and commendable. I guess we can all rest easy tonight, knowing that the worldviews of our country's children, the future of our country, are all free from views that seek to promote hate and disrupt democracy. This is how these people like to present themselves, but it's pretty clear, as far as I'm concerned, what this really is. It's yet another example of just how sort of solidified society, education, politics, the media, etc. have all become, as far as all things progressivism is concerned. All of the proverbial progressive talking points are no longer political views shared by those on the left, views that could be debated once upon a time, views that weren't set in stone, views that were either agreed or disagreed upon depending on political leanings, party allegiances, etc. Instead now, the sort of progressive talking points are presented as fact. For example, man-made climate change is real, right? So from here on out, any policy going forward must act accordingly. There is no debate to be had. The science is settled. The only debate that you can have is in relation to what could be done to rectify the issue. Anything deviating away from that is deemed science denial. Another good example would be the SNP's little gay conference a couple of months ago before the summer holidays, where they were having a anti-far right summit, where they invited every single mainstream Scottish party, bar who they deemed to be far right. And they all sat in a little circle jerk and presented the progressive worldview as the status quo, claimed everybody in Scotland shared their views, and they all needed to come together to stamp out the impending doom of the far rights. Racism is another one. Systemic, unconscious, structural. Ethnicity pay gaps, gender pay gaps. They control the narrative. They control the discourse, and unfortunately, by extension, they also control how any pushback is presented. And here we are yet again, finding ourselves in a position where they're going after our youth. And they've got the gall to insist and proclaim that they're doing this because they're on the right side of history. It's fucking poison, truth be told. Point in case, though, Sustainable Development Goal 4, quality education. Now, of course, this is something I've spoken about hundreds of times over the years, the Sustainable Development Goals, but there's a point for me bringing it back up again, right? But obviously, Sustainable Development Goal 4 is ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and promoting lifelong learning opportunities for all. Education liberates the intellect, unlocks the imagination, and is fundamental for self-respect. It's key to prosperity and opens a world of opportunities, making it possible for each of us to contribute to a progressive, healthy society. So, yet again, even this bullshit is geared towards ensuring the continuation of all things progressive. Regardless, if you come down to the targets of Sustainable Development Goal 4.7, and you see here that by 2030, the intention is to ensure that all learners acquire the knowledge and skills needed to promote sustainable development, including, among others, through education for sustainable development and sustainable lifestyles, human rights, gender equality, promotion of a culture of peace and nonviolence, global citizenship, and appreciation of cultural diversity, and of culture's contribution to sustainable development. Okay? Now, that's very interesting to note. Just also on a side note as well, Vision 2030, this is one of many fucking agendas and documents and whatnot that can be found on the Scottish Government and Education Scotland's website. But Vision 2030, this is a very old one, right? But if we come down to their intentions, what do we have here? Their vision for 2030. Scotland is to be the best nation in the world for children to grow up and develop. Every learner receives their entitlement to learning for sustainability. Yes, that's right. One of their rights here in Scotland, in Rainbow Unicorn Land, funnily enough, is that they all have a right to have this education placed upon them, thrust upon them. It's their entitlements. Isn't that nice and progressive? Anyway, every practitioner demonstrates learning for sustainability in their practice in everyday school and setting as a coherent whole school and community approach. Right, but this bit here, our learners will be committed to the principles of global citizenship, social justice, and equity, democratic participation, and living within the ecological limits of our planets. Okay, or Target 2030, their new and improved, updated version of this, right? Where it says down here, the call from learners and educators is clear. More needs to be done to ensure all learners receive their entitlement for learning for sustainability. They fully recognize the importance of climate and social justice, equality, and outdoor learning. We need to accelerate the speed of change and educate our learners for the future. What future would that be? Well, that's right, a socially just, equitable, and progressive future, of course. Point being, for me bringing this stuff up, is isn't it strange? And I will showcase what some of these experts are referring to when they refer to, um, online hate and misinformation, etc. But point being, though, it's very strange that all of the bullshit that our learning for sustainability education is trying to instill into the mindsets of children, absolutely everything that is counterintuitive to this agenda is deemed disinformation, misinformation, hateful, or extremist in nature. Funny that, it's almost as if what I said at the beginning is that the progressive narrative completely solidified, and any fucking deviation away from it is deemed as a problem, as opposed to a differing opinion. So that brings us to the Digital Discourse Initiative, right? The Digital Discourse Initiative is a project provided by the TIE campaign on ISD for educators in Scotland. As part of a new international collaboration, children and young people are exposed to false and harmful information. Who gets to determine what is false and what is not harmful? The arbiters of truth and whatnot, Extremist ideologies and content and hate across online spaces. They often do not have the tools to critically navigate this, and therefore their sense of identity, worldviews, and interactions with others around them can be impacted by what they are consuming online. It's very nice of these individuals to insist and proclaim and pretend that they give two fucks about the well-being of children, and going so far as to insinuate or let slip, that their brains ain't fully formed yet. You know, they're still exploring their identities, but yet it's absolutely fine to teach them all about global citizenship and learning for sustainability and equity and climate justice, etc. You know, again, if it's not progressive, then it's a problem. Anyway, it says down here that the ongoing project will provide schools and education settings with the knowledge, understanding, and tools to equip children and young people to navigate online environments critically and safely, build resilience to disinformation, and to better identify and disengage from prejudicial, hateful, or extremist content. The initiative was launched in January of this year with the publication of a professional learning course for teachers, school staff, and educators in Scotland, with the intention to upskill educators with educational strategies to counter the effects of online hate and disinformation. Okay. The focus group discussions were held with over 200 secondary schools in 2024 to inform the development of this project. They found that pupils were concerned about the normalisation and minimisation of extreme hate and prejudice online. And I wonder what they could be referring to. Oh, particularly misogyny, not misandry, homophobia and racism. Of course. Of course. So again, all of the fucking bullshit that they're learning in their classrooms in relation to learning for sustainability and global citizenship education, because of course it's their entitlement to learn about such things. And any pushback, any narratives that sort of deviate away from the status quo, then that's a problem. All of a sudden that's deemed as prejudice and extreme hate, not just hate, extreme hate, and it must be stamped out accordingly. Right? But just to come down to the bottom bit here before I go any further, because lo and behold, who has funded this project? This project's been part funded by the Thai campaign and the Rainbow Unicorn government themselves. Of course, Thai receives core grant funding from the government to support the delivery of its core work, which includes developing new resources to address prejudice-based behaviour at school. So, if we come to ISD briefly, I just want to show this. The Institute for Strategy Dialogue is dedicated to safeguarding democracy and human rights by reversing the rising global tide of polarization, extremism, and authoritarianism. What we do, right? And all you need to do is come here. Issue areas: disinformation, far right extremism, Islamism, women in extremism, Islamophobia, anti Semitism, misogyny, and anti LGBTQ. Right? Where is misandry? Where is far left extremism? No, of course not. Of course not. You know, one could argue that the global homo open border bullshit and progressivism could be deemed extreme in nature, given the fact that it's leaving a pretty fucking savage trail of destruction in its wake in relation to every policy it's enacted. You know, we could make those arguments. That could be deemed extreme. Yeah. But again, it's pretty self-explanatory what's going on here. This is a bunch of activists who are polluting, yet again, Scottish academia with their bullshit, with their progressive talking points, to ensure that the progressive talking points remain the only thing that children are allowed to fucking tolerate and absorb. Okay. For example, it says here, this website, that they monitor far-right extremism. Of course they do. And against the backdrop of rising far-right radicalization and polarization and a surge in xenophobic and anti-democratic movements across Western countries, anti-democratic movements. I mean, who they determine this? These people, the lefties, the progressives, they're the ones that are insinuating that their opponents are anti-democratic, right? Regardless. For over a decade, they have conducted research on the push and pull factors on far-right extremists, the spread of hate and disinformation, reciprocal radicalization dynamics between far-right and Islamists, as well as far-right, far-left movements. Oh, the far-left gets a little mention, does it? That's very progressive and inclusive. Right. Anyway, and then it's got a rake of different PDFs and whatnot that they've punted out. How right-wing extremists use alternative platforms for radicalization. Telegram, how far-right extremists and conspiracy theorists are expanding their infrastructure via Telegram. So, Back to the Digital Discourse Initiative briefly. Relevant research and helpful resources are signposted by category. Thanks for that, guys. Really appreciate it. Right. But if you come down to the research, and yet again, it seems to be well biased if you do that, if I do say so myself. An in-depth analysis of extremism and hate speech on TikTok. The report also highlights how users issued threats to public figures based on coof conspiracies and misinformation, documenting a worrying intersection that may fuel further extremism. Mm-hmm. The extreme right on Discord, sorry. Fuck it, Jesus. This briefing is part of IST's Gaming Extremism series, exploring the role online gaming plays in the strategy of far-right extremists in the UK and globally. Right, okay. Everything's about the far right, it's not about the far left, of course, no. To better understand the impact TikTok has had, analysts gathered and analysed data on trends in hate speech extremist content. Data for the white supremacy content study was collected during 1 week in mid-August 2023 and indicates that such content was alive and well on the platform. Oh, really? Oh, no. And what would they deem as far right, or what would they deem as white supremacist in nature? You know, if the ADL is anything to go by, it's safe to assume that definitions are somewhat nebulous. Regardless, you get the drift to a certain extent, where it says here that to better understand the impact TikTok has had, well, I've read that, but TikTok appears to have taken measures to improve content moderation practices since the study on extremism and hate speech in the platform. This new series demonstrates that TikTok is still ineffective in removing volatile, fuck knows what that word is, violative. It's not a word I've heard before, admittedly. Anyway, let's just have a wee brief look through this, just briefly, because I'm somewhat curious because I have no life, clearly. Let's see. Key findings. White supremacist content remains incredibly easy to find. TikTok promotes search terms that helps users evade content moderation. TikTok appears to be algorithmically amplifying and recommending white supremacist content to users. Again, though, I'd love to see how they're defining white supremacist. Researchers recorded numerous examples of videos asperging white supremacist content from users with low follower counts that received over 100,000 plus views. Oh no! High-performing videos like this often include content glamorizing white supremacist shooters. That's what you call sparks, and their friends. Or hybridized forms of hate in which white supremacist material is used to express anti-migrant, anti-Semitic, and anti-Muslim rhetoric. Of course, so, like, this is a problem that's been on the it's been self-explanatory for some time because they've got such a grip on the narratives and the parameters and whatnot and the definitions. But at the end of the day, any fucking talk whatsoever of anti-immigration sentiment, whether that's just legitimate concerns or otherwise, is deemed far right or hateful, etc. To such a point, we've got people in the Scottish Parliament deeming any calls to reduce immigration and reduce our asylum system or reduce the amount of people seeking asylum in Scotland. That's been deemed fascistic. You know, this is where we are at now. Oh, God, what a bunch of cringe, eh? I'm not going through all that shit. But let's have a look at this. A handful of videos in the sample received fewer than 100 views, but 16 videos in the sample received more than 100,000 views. The most viewed video in the sample featured an image of a white woman representing European women in 2001 and a woman in a niqab representing European women in 2048, suggesting that Islam will fundamentally change Europe and European women in a negative way and at the expense of white people. Even that in and of itself, you can't even say it for what it is. You have to mislead with your gay little fucking study, right? So instead of just pointing out that by 2048, if trends continue, Islam will be a lot more prominent demographically or in a demographic context, right? They can't just say that for what it is. No, they have to sort of poo-poo the point in case by saying, oh no, it's they're trying to say that it will affect women in a negative way at the expense of white people, right? Of course, it will have a detrimental effect on your average woman in Europe as time goes on, but that's not the point that's been made by that fucking image right there. The image quite clearly indicates that time is ticking and trends are changing. This is what they do, though. That's white supremacy. Apparently, this is far right to point out fucking trends. Oh dear. Videos promoting figures represent clear and obvious violations of TikTok's guidelines on violent and hateful organizations. Oh dear. Dearie dear. Oh, fuck it hell. And then they go on to talk about active clubs, Dylan Roof, what the fuck? Hitler, John Doyle. John Doyle's apparently far right. What the fuck, man? Oh dear. Patriotic alternative, Nick Fuentes. Oh, Jesus. Categories of hate: anti-Muslim, anti-Semitism, anti-migrant, refugee. Right? Point. You kind of get the point, right? So there's that. They've also got on their website, if I can fucking get back on that, tools and strategies for schools to counter the effects of online hate. Come on to their resources and come all the way down to the bottom. Is it here? Yeah, I was already on that bit. So then we've got misogyny. Extreme misogyny is not new, but online spaces are facilitating a resurgence and entrenching of attitudes and behaviors that seek to justify and incite violence against women and girls. The internet makes it possible for these misogynistic views to spread rapidly. This phenomenon is a growing concern in Scotland. I mean, fuck off. Oh, man. And I mean, it even says on this briefly that the internet makes it possible for these misogynistic views to spread. Online spaces target young men and seek to radicalize them into extreme misogynistic beliefs. Many indoctrinated men then perpetuate harm against their women peers. Right? It then says down here, it goes on about incels, of course. Of course it does. That there was a bit in particular that I wanted to bring up before I move on. But this bit here is also interesting. Again, if it's not progressivism and it's pushing back in any capacity against progressivism, or it's an alternative viewpoint, right, that is deemed unacceptable and immediately will be stamped out. Nonetheless, its various groups share a common language and core belief that create and reinforce a united identity centered on a hatred of women and feminism and a pervading sense of white male victimization. White male victimization. And they wonder why there is so many white men and young white men who end up being deemed extremist in nature when every single facet of society is continuously shitting on them. Whether it's the equality legislation, for example, every group protected by white men, the hate crime bill, every group protected by white men, positive discrimination, positive action, shafts white men and young white boys or young adolescents. Even the Police Scotland hate monster, what did they say? It was it was white men that perpetuate hate crimes, of course. Anyway, it goes on about the red pill, it goes on about incels. I was hoping to find the bit that I was fucking thinking of. Let's see if I can get it if I type in this shit. According to the narrative, red pill men have awakened to the alleged reality that society is rigged against them. Feminism is a destructive worldview. A destructive force, and women are irrational, hypergamous, and in need of domination. In fact, the manosphere asserts the patriarchy does not exist because not all men experience the privileges that patriarchy would afford them, such as access to women and sex. But even this bullshit about patriarchy, etc., It's just never-ending slop. Right? It's never-ending slop. And that is part of the problem. But just to sort of conclude this, so my point being that all of this bullshit that's been introduced in schools will be introduced going forward in schools in our progressive, sustainable environments, right? It's all to ensure that counterpoints do not get addressed and or discussed and or considered and or thought about and whatnot, right? And as I said, isn't it strange? Isn't it funny? Isn't it convenient that all of the bullshit that the PDFs and the documents and the agendas of learning for sustainability and whatnot have long-term plan-wise for children to learn and adopt going forward is the very same things that they're trying to protect with things such as their again digital discourse initiative.
Teach children to read and write. We need to teach them how to dissect that information and critically think. Is this true? Is this factual? Out on the doors, I often hear firsthand information about local immigration or asylum seekers or refugees. And myself and my team, when we've been going out and chatting to people, we saw there was a real issue with a lot of misinformation locally. So we've been gently nudging people, doing some fact checking and getting back to people with that through our office. But could you imagine the power of a society who instantly critically think about what they're hearing and reading and what the agenda might be behind that? So it isn't just about reacting to information after the fact, it's about preparing our young people ahead of the game.
Conference, online disinformation is not just a digital nuisance, it is a growing threat to our democracy and the well-being of our young people. Every day, children in our schools are exposed to hate, conspiracy and misogyny online.
Oh, children have been exposed to misogyny online. You know, the sort of weird, hyperbolic worldview, the hysterical worldview that feminists find themselves existing in. It sort of trickles into everyday life for everybody else. Right. And again, I'd like for these people to define misogyny, etc. The reality of the matter is, feminism, not all of it, but a chunk of it, has become pretty damn cancerous, pretty damn extreme. Not all feminists, but a chunk of them are, right? And that's kind of what people push back against, because in this day and age where there isn't one fucking thing a woman can't do that a man can do, in a world where women have equal rights and then some, they still whine and moan and bullshit and proclaim that they're fucking the victims of gender inequality and whatnot. And we've moved away from equality in favor of equity. And all of a sudden, social justice and equity and everything's about pandering and prioritizing women, right? STEM. We need to do more in STEM. We need to eradicate gender stereotypes in schools so women can become CEOs. We need to do all of these things to prioritize women. They've even gone so far as to sort of redefine gender inequality in and of itself, right? Gender-based violence, for example, right? So if a woman and a man are in a relationship and it's toxic and it's violent and the man is violent, whether that be coercive or physically, that's because of misogyny. Whereas if a man is the victim of a woman's wrath, whether that be coercion, abuse, or physicality, that is just deemed as abuse, right? They've actually redefined every aspect of things that were once upon a time set in stone dictionary-wise. You know, I could go on. This crap is relentless, and it wouldn't realistically bother me too much if it wasn't for the fact that they're insistent on ensuring that it's included in our academia. You know what I mean? They're fucking crackpots, and they're full of shit.
How a generation sees the world and each other. Teachers across Scotland are telling us that they see the effects in classrooms. Pupils are anxious, confused, and too often accepting this type of language and behaviour as normal. That cannot continue. This is why the work of the TIE campaign and their partners in the Institute for Strategic Dialogue matters so much. Their digital discourse initiative, part funded by the Scottish Government, gives teachers the practical tools to help pupils navigate online spaces critically and safely. This work is already underway. Earlier this year, Professional Learning for Teachers was launched as part of a national CPD, and since January, feedback from educators has been overwhelmingly positive. Teachers are telling Ty this training has given them confidence, insight and real strategies to tackle online hate and disinformation head on.
So yeah, basically to sort of summarise, didn't realise the video would go on for as long as it did, but hey ho. Point being that, like I said at the very beginning, right, when they talk about disinformation, hate, and what is and what isn't true, and what can and cannot be taught in schools, what can and cannot be classed as harmful, etc., they control the narrative. This progressivism on fucking steroids, and any deviation away from that is deemed as extreme, hateful, far right, etc., and it must be stamped out. It's bullshit. It's cancel.
All I know is that first, you've got to get mad. You've got to say, I'm a human being. God damn it. My life has value.